Hello and welcome to Why Securing Public Wi-Fi is More Important Than Ever. Today's webinar is sponsored by DNSFilter and produced by SmartBrief. My name is Scott Becker. I'm from SmartBrief and I'm excited to be your moderator for this fireside chat style conversation. Now, before we get to today's great content, we have 4 housekeeping items that will help you get the most out of this session on securing public Wi-Fi. First off, we want this to be an informative event for you, so we encourage any questions in the questions box in your webinar control panel. Not only will we have team members responding to questions during the live event, but we'll also have a dedicated Q&A session at the end of the presentation where we'll discuss in greater detail some of the top questions that you ask. Now, that Q&A panel is also the place to let us know about any technical issues that you might be experiencing. A browser refresh will fix most audio, video, or slide advancement issues, but if that doesn't work, just let us know there in the Q&A and we'll provide further technical assistance. Now, in the handout section of your webinar control panel, you'll find that we're offering some resources. I'd especially like to call your attention to a link to learn more about DNSFilter. And finally, at the end of this webinar event, we will be awarding a $250 Amazon gift card to one lucky registrant. Of course, you must be in attendance during the live event to qualify for the prize. The official terms and conditions of today's prize drawing can be found in the handout section as well. Just scroll down and you'll find the link with the details there. So with that out of the way, let's get to today's timely discussion. It's my pleasure to bring out our presenter today, Carl Levine, Manager for Sales Engineering at DNSFilter. Well, Carl, thanks for joining me today.
Scott, my pleasure.
I can't tell you how excited I am to talk about the security of free public Wi-Fi, because I'm a guy who bought a cheap Wi-Fi router back in the day to learn how to knock down web networks. And I'm also a guy who's still, gets nervous every time a hotel asks me to connect to their unsecured network and then enter my room number. It's like, what is going on here? Is this secure? I don't know. But before we get started, and speaking of your expertise, would you mind introducing yourself and your experience in managing network security?
Sure. Well, my name is Carl Levine. I'm the Manager of Sales Engineering at a company called DNSFilter, as you can see on my shirt. So I've been playing with the internet for damn near 30 years at this point. And so, Wi-Fi has been kind of part and parcel of that experience for about the last 20. As far as, I go, I've managed, small networks, in the workplace. But really my forte is more on the internet infrastructure side, where it comes to what happens when that information leaves the network and goes out to the public internet. With that being said, there's certainly some, trends and some threats that we should explore as we discuss today.
Okay. All right. Excellent. All right. So, countless trainings and security advice articles pretty much say the same thing. They say don't secure to unsecured, or don't connect to unsecured Wi-Fi networks. So what are the primary security risks associated with unsecured Wi-Fi networks?
Well, I think, it lies right there in the word unsecured. What you're talking about is, you have a computer, a handheld device, etc., communicating with a router. And in that transmission is information that could otherwise be disseminated and unpacked to understand what you're trying to do. And depending on the protocols that are being used in that transmission, you could have unsecured personal identifiable information or financial information or anything that could really be used to exact some pretty nasty stuff.
Yeah, and that's on the user side, that's a problem. For the organization that's hosting the unsecured network, are there any risks for them?
Absolutely. Depending on how they have their network set up, if the Wi-Fi service is not sort of segregated from their production environment or, an employee network where other information could be, potentially uncovered, you're effectively leaving the gates open to your castle.
Not a good idea.
No.
So, So speaking of that, from the attacker standpoint, what are some of the common methods that they're using to exploit the vulnerabilities of unsecured Wi-Fi networks?
Yeah, I mean, as you said earlier, you were cracking open WEP networks back in the day.
Yeah.
There's a bevy of tools available that fraudsters, hackers can use not only on their own laptops or mobile devices to exploit what's going on in an unsecured network. There's also third-party devices, things like pineapples, for instance,
Mm.
which are a small little device that can connect to the Wi-Fi and wreak some havoc.
Yeah. Okay. So, what are the potential consequences, of users such as employees just accessing sensitive information over an unsecured public Wi-Fi network?
Yeah, I mean, trade secrets are a big thing, especially as more and more of us work remote. I mean, at DNS Filter, we've been 100% remote since we were founded.
Hmm.
So we did it before it was cool, but then you had a bunch of people who, usually would work in an office where they were at a workstation or even a laptop that was hardwired into a network. And, all the access controls were sort of, ran from the firewall.
Right.
Well, when you decouple that and you take things to the field, you run the risk then of sending information that may or may not be, suitable for all audiences. Think about trade secrets, proprietary information, especially, remote coding, GitHub and all sorts of things like that. If that's all being transmitted over an unsecured Wi-Fi connection, there's trade secrets and other things that could be potentially harmful to a business and their viability. Or all the same, your personal information could also be intercepted, and identity theft and other sort of maladies of that nature could certainly arise.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. All right. That makes sense. So, what security measures would you recommend for businesses to implement to secure their public Wi-Fi networks and protect both their customers and their own data?
Yes, certainly. I mean, any of the Wi-Fi methods that are not just a wide open network will have some degree of encryption. So, there are protocols that are built right into Wi-Fi that allow you to connect securely, hence the little lock, to that wireless network. And in doing so, that means that that 2.4 gigahertz or 5 gigahertz, or even, we look down the road at, some of the other, more advanced, Wi-Fi 6, Wi-Fi 7 technology, all of that information is then encrypted from end to end. So, somebody couldn't disseminate that without having a, private key to unlock the public key. It's generally a lot safer.
Right. Right. Okay. So, how do regulatory frameworks impact the security requirements for public Wi-Fi networks, and what are the compliance considerations for businesses there?
I mean, compliance is the hot word in 2024 with frameworks like CMMC and people wanting to be SOC 2 compliant and making sure that all that data stays where it's supposed to stay. And by securing your Wi-Fi, that's a big part of that. You're able to then say that you meet the requirements of those compliance frameworks, which is absolutely crucial if your business requires any sort of cyber insurance.
Mm.
Cyber insurance policies won't typically cover you if you're just opening up your network for everybody to go and poke away at.
Good point. So, what are some of the trends that you're seeing when it comes to the security of Wi-Fi networks?
So I think that, from that compliance standpoint, there becomes this, idea of liability as well.
Yeah.
If I walked into the Starbucks at the end of my street and I saw somebody looking at porn, I'd be absolutely flabbergasted, first of all, like who does that in a public place? But the fact of the matter is, there's people out there that do that. And, that actually creates a liability because then, say I'm there with my son who isn't old enough to understand what that is, but, in a couple of years, you'd be like, look, everybody's hugging. Oh, no, we don't want that. That's bad,
Yeah.
and people can sue for that. And that can have a direct implication on the brand, on, not only just for that one location, but the entire chain.
Oh,
Hey, did you hear about that coffee shop that you can walk into and people can just go and do whatever the heck they want on the internet? It's bad. you have to, really kind of think about what you're rendering as a service,
Yeah.
and then, kind of look at, how to, pare down what people can do on a public Wi-Fi network.
Right. Are there still a lot of unsecured networks out there?
Hmm. I see quite a bit, and I think that it's going to come to an inflection point where, you know, kind of, I look back on, HTTP versus HTTPS for web browsers.
Sure.
Now, your Google rank for your website won't even come up if you don't offer, TLS encryption on your website.
Right.
Well, who's to say that, in coming years that we could have some kind of regulatory function in place that says, you can't provide an unsecured unsecured Wi-Fi. Maybe they'll stop selling unsecured Wi-Fi routers. They'll take that right out of the equation. And I think that'd be a great thing because, again, you reduce the risk of any of these sort of bad things happening.
Right.
And I think that, ultimately, between that and like good content filtering and just making sure that, the people that are connecting to this are legit, you certainly, reduce that risk. But, I've still seen quite a bit of, free public Wi-Fi out there. And it's kind of an interesting trend because I think about, the last iPhone that I bought.
Hmm.
I went from a 4G LTE phone that I very rarely ever had to connect to somebody's Wi-Fi to get a good signal to this
Right.
5G. And 5G, it's got this millimeter wave technology that doesn't penetrate a building the way that LTE did. LTE had these nice long
Yeah.
flowing waveforms that, could, penetrate a steel building, a concrete building, concrete reinforced steel, that sort of stuff. So like, for instance, I'd walk into the grocery store and my wife could text me and say, "Hey, you forgot the milk." That really can't happen these days. And granted, the grocery store I go to doesn't have Wi-Fi, at least in most of their stores.
Hmm.
But it's becoming more and more of a trend now that, retail establishments not only having to stay ahead of the curve with, online retailers need to offer an online experience. Like when I go to Home Depot, for instance, like I'm always on their Wi-Fi, not because I need my wife telling me what to buy at Home Depot, but more like, hey, I need to locate this special piece of hardware. What aisle is that in? And if I
Right.
have one bar of 5G versus a big old Wi-Fi icon on my screen, it's indicating a strong signal.
Yeah.
I'm going to be using that Wi-Fi to go track down what I need.
Right. Yeah. In so many stores now, it's required for the shopping experience that you have a phone with connectivity.
Absolutely. I mean, try
Yeah.
and find somebody in Home Depot these days. It doesn't work out so well.
No. That's really interesting what you're saying too, just about 5G kind of,
Hmm.
like I'm still on a 4G, LTE network. And
Lucky
so,
you.
yeah, I guess because I never, connect to Wi-Fi unless I'm at
Hmm.
somebody's house for a weekend or something.
Sure.
I
And
just
that was always the way. Like
rely on the data.
I still to this day, like I still think it's rude. Like when personally for me, like if I'm going to someone's house,
Yeah,
like if I walk in and like, hey, what's your Wi-Fi? Like I'm there to hang out with the person. I'm there to make a human connection, right?
right.
So it's like, what's this doing now? It's like 5G is now usurping all of our personal connections, maybe? I don't know.
Yeah,
Uh, just something to think about.
definitely. Um, Now, one more thing on trends. Are you noticing an increase in the concern around protecting wireless networks?
I think there's just concern around everything these days,
Hmm.
and rightfully so. I mean, everything's become more pervasive and ubiquitous, right? So we've all got these supercomputers in our pockets. We're opening up laptops at airports and Starbucks and, pretty much anywhere that, we need to, transact business these days.
Yeah,
And so it's not getting any less, it's only getting bigger. So I think that with, more ubiquity comes, more risk.
right, right. So, can you explain the importance of regularly updating software and firmware on devices that connect to public Wi-Fi networks and how that contributes to overall security?
Absolutely. I mean, I've been party to, a lot of warnings coming from not from the device itself, but like third-party software that
Mhm.
our authentication mechanism here at work is it's Okta and Duo and a bunch of other systems like that. And if
Right.
I use that for 2FA and it says, hey, your iOS is outdated, like there's a reason for that. And not a lot of people look at the release notes that come from the device manufacturers. Like whenever Apple releases an update, like some people in my house are saying, oh, what new emojis do we get? Me, I'm saying, what new security do we get?
Mhm.
What 0-day threat did they find that they're now trying to squash? And that's probably the biggest thing, is finding the exploits in these devices. Now, I don't want to spark an Apple versus Android debate here. That's something we can have another time. But, when it comes to the different devices that are made, you look at an Android device and there's many different manufacturers. You use many different chipsets, many different, drivers that have to go into that operating system to allow those things to work. And if, say, somebody goes with a low bidder piece of, like a chip inside of an Android device, and the manufacturer of that put a backdoor in it,
Mhm.
well, there's your 0-day threat. Like, who knows what they can potentially usurp from that device. So, granted, that's a pretty extreme case, but keep in mind that people that work for the device manufacturers and build the operating systems for them are constantly iterating. That's software. There's
Yeah.
constant iteration, looking at bugs, looking at other things that could cause potential harm. So it's always advisable to stay up to date as much as possible with the operating system and other software on your devices.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, let's get into some myths. So
Hmm.
what are some common misconceptions or myths about Wi-Fi security that you frequently encounter, and how can they be addressed?
I like the one where people are like, "Oh, I've got a VPN, I'm safe."
Hmm.
You're still going over an unencrypted public Wi-Fi to get there. So who's to say that's not getting in the path of danger?
Hmm.
I think that people are like, well, I've got the old version of my OS, and that works fine.
Uh-huh.
No, that goes back to my point I just made about updating your software. Like you want to avoid that. Like
Yeah.
um, I just as a funny aside, I have a virtual machine that I have to run. I play with cars a lot in my
Uh-huh.
garage, and one of the scan tools that I have, in order to update, the only way you can update it is through Windows XP. That's the
Yeah.
newest version of the software that's used to update the specific device. And I've made it a point, like, so this virtual machine that I have, I've always air gapped it when I run it in VirtualBox. I'm like, okay, like it doesn't need internet. All it needs is access to the USB port, to RS-232 converter back to this thing. And
Hmm.
I opened it up to the internet one day, and incidentally, because it was running on my Mac with DNSFilter, I could see all the requests that Windows was trying to make, and a lot of malicious threats came up on that query log. And it was a Virgin XP machine, so it's only designed to work with this one scan tool. That's all the things that ever was installed. It's never seen the internet besides that. The
Yeah.
fact that I just immediately fired up Windows XP and it was like I opened Internet Explorer and it was like, yeah, that's frightening to me. So again, this goes back to maintaining all the system software on your devices to ensure that you're not falling victim to even yesterday's threats.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's a great example, because I mean that was one of the I used to spend I used to work at a Windows focused publication, and
Hmm.
we spent a lot of time writing about upgrades and migration cycles, and that was the biggest thing keeping people on XP was they had some application that was
Yeah,
mission critical, and it was never going to be updated, and so they were stuck with a box and trying to do solutions like you're doing.
exactly. Yeah, so I had to isolate that, save for going and building like another an old Pentium 2 or something. Yeah, it's a little more sustainable running that on my Mac.
So, are there any emerging technologies or trends that have the potential to improve the security of public Wi-Fi networks in the future?
Well, I'd be remiss if I didn't say that DNS filter plays a big role in that.
Hmm.
Uh, our technology is actually in one of the largest retail chains in North America. Every one of their stores, their guest Wi-Fi, which admittedly is public when you go and you log in, but on the other side of that, they're looking at threats. They're looking at certain content types they want to keep users away from when they're in the store. And that's twofold. It's not just the people that are coming into the store, consumers. Think about all of like the Instacart and like other delivery services that rely on a reliable internet connection to complete those transactions.
Right.
It's important that they have connectivity and that, we're not, blocking that. But what that has done as a collateral effect in a good way is because we run the fastest DNS resolver in the world. Anywhere in any one of these stores, you're getting connected to the closest, most logical DNS server in the in our network,
Mhm.
and getting an actual performance improvement despite the upstream provider that may be providing bandwidth to that store. So even in far-flung locations like Holton, Maine, or any weird far-off corner of the country, you're in one of their stores and you can reliably access the internet while knowing that you're being protected,
Yeah.
from certain threats.
Hey, just for anybody in the audience who's not familiar with DNS filter, what do you guys do in terms of unsecured wireless networks or related to unsecured wireless networks?
Yeah, I mean, whether you're running secured or unsecured, we do have a guest Wi-Fi option, which effectively secures the guest Wi-Fi network. And the way that we do that, and I mentioned we have a huge network. It's well over 80 different locations over the world. Dual Anycast, which means that we have two networks that, regardless of where you are in the world, are going to route you to the fastest location, logically to where you sit. Uh, we have a machine learning engine under this product that is categorized over 1 billion fully qualified domain names. What that means for you out there in non-DNS speak land is that we've gone and scanned pretty much the entire internet at this point. And what we've done is we've categorized it, but also identified threats. So that machine learning engine does about 60-40 split. 60% comes from us. 40% comes from third-party lists, which other providers tend to use as their primary source of data. We fact check that against our machine learning engine. There's even components that can reliably predict 50 days ahead of third-party lists. A domain generation algorithm situation where you have a domain name that was just keyboard smashed out of nowhere, but already serving bad content. We've already blocked it. So really, for guest Wi-Fi operators, what this means is that we can provide a very effective and fast name resolution service, because DNS is at the core of everything that we do. If you go anywhere on the internet, you're touching a DNS server somewhere. Well, why not touch the fastest one out there and get that figured out quicker? And in doing so, we stop threats. We recently contracted with a major hotel chain who this didn't come from their cybersec team. It came from their corporate responsibility. They wanted to cut down on the threat of sex trafficking, child pornography being accessed from within their properties. And DNS filter, we block those resources immediately right out of the gate. Like, you don't even have to press a button. That is like table stakes for us. And it was extremely important that they understood where these trends were happening, so that they can kind of look at how they deploy networks and how they potentially could save lives by preventing something physically happening between people.
Yeah.
So for me, like that, I don't think about things as much when it comes to the business. Like, yeah, we want to be a going concern. We want to make money. This is America. Capitalism, yada yada. The more important thing to me is, like, how many lives are we protecting, potentially saving,
Hmm.
with a DNS request that doesn't go through that could have, triggered a course of events.
Right.
And I think that what you're going to see in coming years is that it's not going to necessarily be a cybersecurity initiative as much as a physical security. Especially, in the hospitality and, travel industries,
Mm-hmm.
where you tend to see a lot of these, wide open networks. Like even, I'm just here north of Boston. Anytime I go to Logan Airport, their Wi-Fi is wide open. And why? Because it's easy. You know,
Yeah.
if they just put their, Wi-Fi password up, everywhere, people would be more inclined. But, you know, it's a double-edged sword. If maybe they put up a QR code, well, who's to say that QR code couldn't be like stickered over by some bad actor and it
I
goes to
remember
some
QR
site
code.
that
Yeah. Yeah.
looks like a login page. I mean, this there's like layers to this, Scott.
Yeah.
It's crazy. And we could certainly go down the rabbit hole of like all the different ways that fraudsters could go and like, you know, screw all this up. But like at the end of the
Right.
day, it's like you almost have to wonder. It's like, well, yeah, there's no little lock icon on that Wi-Fi, but what's going on underneath that Wi-Fi that potentially makes it safe? And you mentioned captive portals earlier. Oh, let's put in my room number. Let's put in my, oh, I'm a Marriott, Gold Elite member, so I get free internet. Um, that's good. That's trusted because that's, a brand.
Mm-hmm.
But, I'm sure you've traveled internationally. I've traveled internationally. You
Yeah.
log on to a free Wi-Fi in any other country, and it's like 1998 with the pop-up ads.
Yeah.
It's nuts. So there's a lot of nuance and kind of like weirdness to all this. But I think that the most important thing you can do is as an operator provide protective DNS. Another another cheap shot there, but also consider that, as an end user, a privacy focused VPN, and it just so happens DNSFilter sells one called Guardian.
Uh-huh.
You'll actually find that if you go and buy an Eero router, Guardian is built right in. You have our privacy focused VPN built right in. And what that does is it obscures your browsing information from third parties, but also encrypts all that traffic as it moves back and forth on the internet. So, if you think our DNS is fast, take our VPN for a ride. I think you'll be really impressed.
Oh, okay. All right. So, do you have any hot takes on the security, or risks of offering free public Wi-Fi or using Wi-Fi networks for business purposes?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, again, and this all comes down to configuration. If you're, you got a, one ISP coming into the building and everything's connected to it, including your guest Wi-Fi router, and it, maybe it's in a separate IP space, but it still goes back to the same, point on the network.
Mm-hmm.
Just be very, very careful about how you set up VLANs and figure out like who's going where and when. Consider locking it down. You can schedule your Wi-Fi to turn off at a certain point. Like, could you imagine just rolling up outside the Starbucks at the end of my street and just getting on their Wi-Fi at 2 a.m? They don't. I'm sure they shut that stuff down and they reopen it at 5 a.m. when they reopen.
Yeah.
That's smart. Just, control the access where you can and just be, diligent in ensuring that, that your users will have a safe experience, but at the same time that your data won't be compromised by running an open Wi-Fi network.
Right. Okay.
But wherever practical, lock it down.
Yeah. Yeah. Great advice. I guess finally, in your role and having a great understanding of how wireless networks operate and
Mm-hmm.
the security risks, what's your personal protocol for connecting to a free guest Wi-Fi network? Do you connect to Wi-Fi when traveling?
Primarily, unless it is secured and they've given me a password,
Mm-hmm.
free Wi-Fi is going to be something that I've got to be in a hell of a pinch to want to jump on that. Like I'm going to call out Harbor Freight Tools right now because that's one of my favorite stores. And if I want to use their coupons,
Mm-hmm.
I have to get on their free Wi-Fi because 5G situation works out, 1960s strip mall with, all sorts of reinforced concrete and a big, aluminum facade. It's not gonna, when I'm, deep in the aisles of Harbor Freight and I want to pull up a coupon, I got to use their free Wi-Fi. I have to trust them.
Hmm.
And then just as soon as I've got that coupon like screenshotted, I disconnect. Uh, so for me, like, free Wi-Fi, if you'd asked me that question 15 years ago, I'd be, oh, hell yeah, I'm all over that.
Hmm.
Why? Because cellular connectivity wasn't what it was. I had like a Verizon flip phone with 1X, whatever that thing was, and you couldn't do crap on the internet with that.
Right.
Now, as soon as 3G came along, I was like, oh, well, look at this. And then like hotspots came out, and it's like, I can have my own Wi-Fi
Yeah.
and it's mine. And then businesses, obviously, coffee shops got smarter. Like there was a coffee shop I used to frequent probably just as many years ago who like they purposely locked down their Wi-Fi and only gave out the password to certain people because they didn't want a bunch of people with computers sitting around. Well, they're not in business anymore, but you know, they may have missed the mark just a little on that one. But I think that just in general, my personal protocol is avoid free Wi-Fi wherever possible, unless you are absolutely certain that you understand the brand. But then again, anybody can just fire up a Pineapple or a random rogue router somewhere and be like, "Oh yes, this is definitely Harbor Freight Wi-Fi."
Right.
You know, so
Yep. Yeah.
crazy.
Well, I think you've talked me into hanging on to my LTE phone for a little bit longer.
It's fine as long as it takes software updates. You're okay.
I do.
Yeah,
I do them the day they're available. All
yeah,
right.
as
Well,
one does.
this has been a great conversation so far. What do you say we open things up to the audience?
Oh, let's do it.
Yep. All right.
Okay. And with that, I am now going to step in for Scott. I'm Keith Ward. I'm a colleague of Scott's at SmartBrief, and I'm going to pinch hit for the Q&A. So, wanted to see, let's see. Okay, we are trying to get Carl online right now, so hold on. And we're going to get him here, and we're going to do some fun Q&A. What a great discussion between Scott and Carl there. I enjoyed that just a ton. It is some really, really interesting stuff. Public Wi-Fi, as they're talking about, is so iffy. I mean, I still know people who will be checking their banking information and such on a public Wi-Fi, when they're in a restaurant or they're in the mall or wherever. So some things like it's crazy what people do not know. Still to this day, you would think the education would have gone a little bit further now, but maybe not. So it looks like we may have Carl online now. He may have.
I'm back.
All right, you dealt with the tech gremlins. Way to go, Carl. they knocked you out right
for the course.
Exactly. Yeah.
Of course. Yeah. It's just it's the way it goes.
Hopefully
I can't blame Wi-Fi for this, though.
Exactly. I was going to say, hopefully you're not calling in now via your cell on a public Wi-Fi network. So,
I'm hardwired into my router over here. We're good.
Outstanding. Well, I'll tell you what, Carl. Then let's dive in since you are up and you are ready to go. First question for you
Always.
Today. We've gotten so much great stuff from our attendees. They are really enjoying this. So let's ask this one first. Edward wants to know, what measures can businesses and governments implement to educate the public about the importance of securing public Wi-Fi and encourage responsible usage practices?
I mean, we should all be singing from the same hymnal here. Like, it's not up to me to make glaring, policy changes when it comes to this sort of stuff. But I think that overall there should just be an awareness. I mean, what do we have to do? Do we have to invent our own Smokey the Bear or something to go out there and say only you can prevent cyber attacks by not using public Wi-Fi? I don't know. I think that almost becomes a rhetorical question, Ed. I think that it is important to kind of get the word out there, and only through good practices by businesses and organizations will people start to see the trend moving more towards a more secured future.
And hopefully webinars like this too, right? So spreading the word.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay. Jeffrey
Tell your
wants to know.
friends.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And tell them to tell their friends, right? Let's get the chain going. Okay. Jeffrey wants to know, will this work with Active Directory so I can still configure local DHCP to use my domain controller's IP for DNS? So all those acronyms means it's probably coming from an admin. A nice techie question, my favorite kind.
Well, good. Nice techie question gets a nice simple answer, and that is yes. So in Active Directory, you have the ability to set up DNS forwarders. So what you would do is replace the forwarders that are in place. It's usually like a public DNS like Google or Cloudflare. The only thing is, if you wanted to use a service like DNSFilter, you would need to sign up, just because we do run what's known as a closed resolver, which means that we only accept DNS queries from sources that we recognize. But that gives you the granularity to go and set up policies and do whatever. I encourage you to reach out to me or my team, if you're interested in checking that out.
Sounds great. Okay, next up, in what ways does the increasing prevalence of IoT, also known as the Internet of Things, the prevalence of IoT devices exacerbate security risks on public Wi-Fi networks?
Massively. I remember an example from a few years ago. There was I think it was a Target department store that an HVAC contractor had gone in and basically put a device onto their public Wi-Fi. And sometime later, that device was backdoored and somebody gained access to the entire store's network. Not good. IoT, just in general, because the devices are so small and there's an ever competing race to the bottom for price, you're going to find the hardware usually is like 1 or 2 generations behind the most cutting edge stuff. And that a lot of those, microcontrollers and smaller sort of devices don't have the logic built in to be really intelligent about how it accesses the internet. All it wants is like a DHCP connection. Great, I have an IP address. Let me go try and get out onto the internet. So I think that IoT is going to, and it has been, and it will continue to be a very interesting space, with regard to cybersecurity as a whole. Until we can really, secure those devices effectively and still maintain good sort of like economies of scale, then, we're going to be plagued with IoT related maladies going forward.
For sure. I think many, if not most of us, remember that that Target breach. Boy, that was just massive, wasn't it? So a great example of exactly how this can be impacted. Okay. John wants to know, since public Wi-Fi networks can potentially manipulate DNS requests to restrict access to certain websites, can using a custom DNS server on my device while connected to public Wi-Fi help protect my privacy and ensure I reach the intended websites?
Absolutely, John. So what happens there is, for instance, speaking from the DNSFilter kind of standpoint, we offer a remote agent known as our roaming client that installs onto endpoints and will leapfrog any DNS assignment that comes down via DHCP. It effectively changes the local resolver to localhost, uses a configuration file to phone home with a private key, and that's how you get your DNS responses. But for the Wi-Fi operator, it may also behoove them to use a technology like DNS over TLS. And what that is instead of using UDP on port 53 for DNS transactions, it encrypts it on port 853 and uses TLS encryption via TCP instead of UDP, so your answers are getting there. And that will, effectively harden that tunnel between the two locations to keep those DNS requests from being man in the middle.
Great. Excellent tip. Okay, Brett has kind of a general question that I think is worth asking. Should we all leave Wi-Fi off on our phones? Just turn that sucker off and leave it off.
I mean, yes and no, right? Like, as I said, if you have a bevy of, locations that you frequent, like for instance, my phone has the Wi-Fi for my house. It has the Wi-Fi for my in-laws' house. It has, and these are all secured networks. They're fine. I keep using Starbucks as an example. That's, one that I tend to turn off right now. Unless they come to us and say, hey, we want to work with you guys, which would be awesome. Uh, and the big reason there is everything I talked about, just now about, unsecured networks, typically bad news. My ISP, for instance, has a, public Wi-Fi offering that they bundle with your, you get your internet service at your house. Well, your login can be used anywhere to log into their Wi-Fi if it's, publicly available. 9 times out of 10 doesn't work. Or, maybe that's an SSID being spoofed. You never know. I'd say that if you know you're going to places that you can trust the Wi-Fi, leave your Wi-Fi on. But generally, if you're outdoors, you're in a car, you're otherwise not in a building that's interfering and acting like a Faraday cage, the 5G signal to your phone should be sufficient, unless of course, you're in Harbor Freight, like I talked about, and surrounded by a steel and concrete building.
I think the Starbucks example is one we can all relate to. It just kind of feels like when you're in there, in Wi-Fi terms, it's like the wild, wild west, isn't it? It's boy, you got to be just super careful because you never know who's going to be listening or snooping or sniffing around, right? Okay, I think we have time for a couple of more questions here before we let you go, Carl. How do we monitor how do we monitor and detect potential security threats or malicious activities on our public Wi-Fi network? And what steps should we take to mitigate them effectively? You've talked about this some, but maybe you can dive a little bit deeper.
Yeah, I'd say your mileage may vary depending on the tech stack that you're running for your public Wi-Fi. For instance, okay, maybe you have like commodity hardware like a Cisco Meraki. You're using a protected DNS service like DNSFilter. All those tools are going to give you some levers and knobs to work with to understand the nature of the domains that are being accessed. Now, it is worth noting that on a network level connection through pretty much any DNS service that provides that level of telemetry, that you don't run the risk of having personally identifiable information as part of that. Just because a lot of times, I know I speak for DNSFilter when I say that, a roaming client customer has a bunch of eDNS client subnet fields that are filled out that represent metadata about the endpoint, mostly from a, like identification standpoint. So when they're protected by a, DNSFilter account and, they go in, it's like, oh, look, it was Carl's personal MacBook that, tried to, go on social media, but was blocked. Well, it ultimately does come down to like what tools you have in place to really hone in on this stuff. So I think that, for the Wi-Fi operators out there, look to a protected DNS service because every transaction that leaves your network has to come through us anyway. So we're going to, see trends and, especially if somebody keeps hitting a blocked resource repeatedly, that's usually a pretty good sign. Somebody's brought a malware infected device or something onto a network that is trying to exact some malicious stuff. And you can rest assured that when you see all those blocked requests, that they weren't able to do what it was they were either consciously or unconsciously trying to do.
Sure. Okay. Let's get to one more question, I think, here, and this is an interesting one. Is it possible to create separate guest and internal networks with their own policies?
Oh, absolutely. So, we have a couple different ways of doing that too. And, if you have a single internet connection coming into a facility, but you want to, bifurcate the sort of access levels, we have a feature known as the NAT IP, which essentially gives you a separate set of resolver IPs for that specific VLAN. So you break it off into two VLANs. You got a guest VLAN and a worker VLAN, and you assign the policy based on the IP address that is used for that resolver. It's really, really cool stuff.
Oh, that is neat. Okay. Now, that's all the questions we have got time for right now, but I do have one final query of my own. You have obviously generated a ton of interest with your discussion with Scott and with the Q&A right now. So somebody wants to take the next step with, with your company. What should they do right after this event is over today?
Go to DNSFilter.com and sign up for a 14-day free trial.
14-day free trial.
That's all I got. 14-day free trial. That's full featured. That's everything. That's every, nut and bolt, lever, knob, stuff to, secure public Wi-Fi, secure your endpoints. If you come in here and you say you got a significant number of users, you'll definitely be hearing from a member of my team saying hello and seeing if there's some way we can, demonstrate this product for you in a more meaningful way.
Outstanding. Well, to paraphrase Homer Simpson, free? Yeah, I think we can afford that. So.
Love Homer.
Carl, it has been such a delight to have you on today and to find out what DNSFilter is doing and just to have some general chats about the state of Wi-Fi security. I learned a ton, and I think the attendees did too. I want to thank you so much for being on with us today. It was a real pleasure.
Yeah, pleasure was all mine. Thank you.
Thanks. Okay, everyone. Wow, that was so much fun to do with Carl. And with that, we are almost wrapped here. We have one final bit of business, however, and that is to give away our Amazon gift card. We've got a $250 card for this event, and the winner of the $250 is Paul Bayerwaltz from Illinois. Paul, I hope I pronounced that properly. If not, it's probably close enough. Congratulations to you, Paul. We will be in touch ASAP to get you your card. And with that, folks, on behalf of the Smart Brief team, I want to thank DNSFilter for making this event possible. I want to thank you, the attendees, for being on today, for your interest in this topic, for your great questions that you were asking throughout the event. It's been so much fun for me to be here with you, and I can't wait to see you in the next one. That's it, folks. Have a great rest of your day.